services provided by Dollmar Meccanica are aware of the environmental impact. They are linked to Dollmar Meccanica's supplies to various clients, whether it's equipment supplies or technical support for the equipment itself, including the supply of products such as traditional solvents. So, the main service offered is assistance with submitting authorization applications that Dollmar Meccanica's clients need to operate their business. Not really. Specifically, the typical client of Dollmar Meccanica is a mechanical workshop, right? It has issues with atmospheric emissions, which come from both mechanical processes, which are somewhat the core of its business, and from degreasing operations. Both the degreasing operations and the mechanical processes result in, as mentioned, emissions into the atmosphere require obtaining a permit. So the support process begins. Preparing and obtaining authorization applications is the first service Dollmar Meccanica provides. The authorization itself includes some obligations. The most typical requirement is checking compliance with the limit value set by the authorization. This check must be carried out once the authorization is granted and then repeated over time with different frequencies depending on the size of the client's facility. So the intervals are usually yearly or every 2 years. So once the authorization process is completed, there will be an initial analytical check on emissions, right? The client's operations will be checked, then repeated annually or every 2 years. Is this authorization a legal requirement? No, it isn't. So what now? Then we also try to remind the client of their deadlines, right? The third service provided by Dollmar Meccanica is still related to emissions assessment, but this time the emissions are somewhat unusual. No, not just those so-called diffuse emissions, meaning not channeled through the usual chimney. The Lombardy region specifically regulates emissions from mechanical operations and requests inspection. These checks are carried out by conducting a workplace investigation to check the concentration of workers' exposure to oil mist. Afterwards, this data is what's called processed using a program provided by the Lombardy region. As I said, this data is processed to determine whether or not there is compliance with the presence of diffuse emissions. This research has a dual purpose. On one hand, as mentioned, it's a requirement stemming from the authorization for atmospheric emissions. On the other hand, it serves to assess what is known as the suitability of the work environment for the individual, the worker. So it complies, let's say, with safety regulations as well as environmental regulations, always in the field of safety. Another service closely related to that is focused on detecting perchloroethylene in the workplace, particularly in the area where the operator works with the degreasing equipment that uses perchloroethylene supplied by the company, and specifically in the area where the operator works using the degreasing equipment that employs perchloroethylene supplied by a woman. So, we've discussed permits, and generally speaking, permits represent what is the world of permits concerning atmospheric emissions. They represent the permits obtained in a simpler way, don't they? Basically, if I want to start a business, if I want to open a body shop, no. I apply for the general authorization that covers body shops. The authorization is already in place and applies to all body shops. When I apply, I commit to adhering to the terms. All the contents of this authorization, which at that moment becomes mine. Why is this authorization called simplified? Because it involves filling out the authorization request, which is quite straightforward. And most importantly, it includes the mechanism of tacit consent. The authorization itself, then, it often includes content that is, let's say, a bit lighter compared to those so-called ordinary authorizations. A reference to the standard authorization. The standard permit doesn't just cover atmospheric emissions. It also covers other environmental areas like water discharges and noise generated by the activity. And it takes longer to complete with 45 days turning into 120. But above all, there's no tacit approval. Unfortunately, some provinces are not prompt, especially in their response. So 120 days might turn into 6 months or even longer. So are there any limits to obtaining exemptions for authorization? From the perspective of mechanical work, the limits aren't very strict, are they? From the degreasing perspective, however, there is a restriction concerning the use of the solvent, which is the raw material used in degreasing processes. Two typical examples. No traditional solvent for degreasing metal operations using chloroethylene, Soltene brand by Dollmar. So for this type of solvent, the maximum allowed consumption to obtain general authorization is 1,000 kilos per year. This is an amount that medium-sized degreasing machines usually do not exceed this amount. But if the solvent, on the other hand, it's a solvent, newer, let's say, a modified alcohol, so this limit is considered a less hazardous solvent, and so the limit increases from 1,000 kilos per year to 2,000 kilos per year. So the scope of the general authorization, so the simplified one, basically doubles, right? Compared to the original, what's your name? General authorizations last for 15 years. From this perspective, they don't differ from the standard authorizations because they also last for 15 years. In this regard, we can recall that the Lombardy region renewed its general authorizations in 2009. They renewed them again in 2024. The Piedmont region, however, specifically for the mechanical sector, has reissued them. They were issued in due course back in 2011, and a new edition of these is expected by 2026. General authorizations. From the customer's perspective, does it matter if the new general authorization for the region is in place or hasn't been obtained? His authorization is valid for 15 years from the time he applied, right? So anyway, for example, take Piedmont. The companies in Piedmont, reasonably all those that obtained the general authorization in 2011, by 2026 they will need to secure the new general authorization. So we'd like to expand, enhance some services that we already partly offer, which mainly involve the use of solvents, right? Who sells Dollmar? And these solvents are sold in small paint shops or large painting facilities. They are sold to the chemical and pharmaceutical industries, among others. Not all of these sectors, besides the usual emission checks we've discussed earlier and the necessary permits. They need to do annual reports on solvent consumption, right? Small paint shops have relatively simpler accounts. There is a comprehensive solvent management plan for higher level activities, higher meaning solvent consumption levels. This is one of the services we already offer and would like to expand. Then there are other services related to worker protection. For instance, some measurements concerning the physical risks that operators are exposed. These risks include noise exposure, the risk of exposure to vibrations, and the risk related to electromagnetic fields. Then there are risks related to slightly more specific issues, which include, one is the investigation into Legionnaire's disease. The other, however, is somewhat new. It's the measurement of radon. Radon is naturally released from rocks. Not from the ground. Some municipalities located in so-called critical areas for radon emissions must check for the presence of this gas. So, the services we've briefly introduced are obviously presented in a somewhat general manner, aren't they? We're always available to the client to delve into the details and, above all, to develop offers that really meet their needs. Understanding the extent needed to measure noise and vibration, an environmental survey, the search for Legionella bacteria.